I was born in 1968 in a small town in Ohio, the kind of place where everyone knew each other's names, where the church bells marked Sundays and the local diner marked Friday nights. My father worked in a steel factory that ran almost the entire town. My mother kept the home, raised us, and sewed clothes for neighbors when money ran tight. We were not rich, far from it, but the rhythm of life felt stable, almost predictable. I remember the house, 2 bedrooms, creaky wooden stairs, a kitchen that smelt of coffee and fried bacon in the mornings. Winters were long and harsh. Wind found its way through the cracks in the windows. And we kids huddled around the heater while Mom told us stories to distract from the cold. Summers were sticky and loud, children riding bikes, radios playing rock songs, and the steady hum of factory machines echoing in the distance. By the time I was 10, I had already learned what struggle meant. My father's back ached constantly from lifting heavy steel, and my mother often skipped meals so we could eat. Clothes were mended, shoes handed down from cousins, and vacations were nothing more than trips to the county fair. Still, there was love, and in love, there was enough. High school came, and with it, the dreams of leaving town. I was a good student. English and history came naturally, but college felt like a luxury we couldn't afford. My father would cough after long shifts, his lungs betraying years of smoke and dust, and the factory had already started laying men off. By the early 80s, the steel industry was faltering, and our town, once so proud, began to look tired. Families left, houses went dark, and I saw my parents' hope shrink a little each day. I married young. At 19, I met David at a local church event. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a laugh that carried across the room. He worked as a mechanic, fixing cars in his father's small garage. He didn't have much, but he had dreams of building his own shop, of giving me a better life than the one I grew up in. I believed him. I wanted to believe him. We married in 1987 with little more than borrowed flowers and a cake from the neighbor's oven. Our first apartment was small, barely 2 rooms, with peeling paint and a bathroom that leaked in the corners. But it was ours, and when you're young, love is a cushion against discomfort. We ate spaghetti 3 nights a week because it was cheap. And when we couldn't afford heat, we wrapped ourselves in blankets and laughed about being pioneers. I worked at the grocery store down the street, while David spent long hours at the garage. Slowly, we built a rhythm: work, home, bills, and the dream of something better. Children came quickly. Our first daughter, Emily, was born in 1989. She had her father's eyes and my stubbornness. Money was tighter than ever. Diapers, formula, Dr. Visitspa. I learned to stretch every dollar. Coupons became my lifeline. I could make a week's worth of meals out of beans, rice, and a bit of chicken. David's temper grew shorter as responsibilities grew heavier. We loved each other, but stress has a way of carving cracks into even the strongest walls. By the mid-90s, we had 2 more children, Michael and Sarah. The apartment was too small, so we moved into a modest house on the edge of town. Small yard, enough for the kids to run, and a basement where David dreamed of setting up a workshop. But with the mortgage came the fear of losing it all, if David's business slowed or if I lost my part-time job. Then came the first real blow. David's father passed away suddenly from a heart attack. The garage became David's responsibility overnight. It was both a blessing and a curse. He was now his own boss. But the debts his father left behind nearly crushed us. I helped with the books at night, trying to make sense of numbers that never added up. There were months when the choice was between paying the electricity bill or buying school supplies. I remember crying in the bathroom once, quietly, so the children wouldn't hear. Life in America is painted as easy, as full of opportunity. But I can tell, UIT is hard. It grinds you down with bills, with rising costs, with the constant fear of falling behind. Healthcare alone nearly ruined us more than once. Emily had asthma, and every hospital visit came with a bill we could never fully pay. I would call the hospital, begging them to reduce the charges, setting up payment plans that seemed to stretch into eternity. Still, we endured. We learned to endure. There is a strength that comes when you have no other choice. Asterisk. The late 90s were some of the hardest years of my life. Emily was growing fast, always asking questions, always wanting more than I could give. She wanted to join the school band, but even the cost of renting an instrument felt like a mountain. Michael was restless, a boy who couldn't sit still, who wore out shoes faster than I could buy them. Sarah was still small, following me everywhere, tugging at my apron while I cooked. I wanted to give them everything, but most days it felt like I was barely keeping the roof over our heads. David worked endlessly at the garage. He'd come home with grease on his hands, his clothes smelling of oil and sweat. Some nights he would slam the door harder than necessary, frustration written all over his face. The debts left by his father weighed on him, and he often spoke about quitting, selling the garage, finding something else. But what else was there? Jobs were leaving our town, factories were shutting down, and people were moving away. We were stuck, clinging to what we had. Arguments began to seep into our marriage. They were never violent, never cruel, but sharp. Enoch to Ort. He would say, I didn't understand the pressure he was under. I would tell him he didn't see how hard I was working, stretching every dollar, worrying every night about bills. There were moments when silence hung heavier than words, when we both sat at the dinner table, pretending not to notice the cracks forming between us. But then the children would laugh, or Sarah would crawl into his lap, and we'd remember why. We were still fighting not with each other, but for each other. By the early 2000s, Emily was in high school. College brochures started coming in the mail, each one a reminder of what we couldn't afford. She was bright, ambitious, dreaming of becoming a nurse. I wanted that for her more than anything, but the tuition fees were overwhelming. We encouraged her to apply for scholarships, to take part-time jobs, anything to lighten the load. Still, the thought of sending her off scared me because I wanted her to have more than I did, but also because I knew the weight of debt could crush even the brightest dreams. Michael began to struggle in school. Teachers called me often, telling me he was distracted, restless, sometimes angry. I tried to help him with homework, but math had changed since my time, and I barely understood it myself. He loved fixing things, the old radios, bikes, anything mechanical. He was his father's son in that way, good with his hands, impatient with books. I worried he would drop out, that he would follow the same hard road we had taken. Then came the accident. David was working late one night when a car slipped off the jack and pinned his leg. He was lucky to be alive, but his leg was crushed badly. Surgery followed. Then months of physical therapy. The garage couldn't run without him, and suddenly our only source of income vanished. We leaned on friends, on church donations, on whatever odd jobs I could find. I cleaned houses, I babysat, I sold baked goods at church events. Every dollar mattered. The children learned quickly what sacrifice meant. Emily gave up prom dresses for second-hand clothes. Michael worked part-time at a grocery store. Sarah, still young, learned to stop asking for toys. We survived, but just barely. The medical bills nearly drowned us. Insurance covered some, but not enough. I would sit at the kitchen table at night, the bills spread out before me, feeling like I was staring at an ocean I could never cross. I cried often, silently, when the children were asleep. David hated feeling helpless. He would sit in his chair, his crutches by his side, staring at the wall. There were nights when he didn't say a word, when the weight of his own body seemed too much for him to carry. I feared losing him not just to pain, but to despair. Bat effug. Slowly, painfully, he learned to walk again. Not the same as before, but enough to return to the garage. Enough to keep going. That resiliences and mine became the backbone of our family. We couldn't quit, not when 3 children looked to us for everything. In 2005, Emily left for college. I can still remember the day we drove her to the dorms. The car packed with her clothes, a small kettle, and her favorite blanket. I hugged her tighter than I'd ever hugged anyone. I cried all the way home, the house feeling emptier without her laughter, but pride filled the silence. My daughter was chasing a dream I never had the chance to chase. Michael, by then, was working more than studying. He spent evenings at the garage, learning from his father, fixing cars with a determination that sometimes scared me. He wasn't going to college. He made that clear. He wanted to work, to earn, to help. I argued with him, begged him to at least finish high school, but he was stubborn. Sometimes I think he saw how hard life was for us and wanted to step in as a man before his time. Sarah grew into a quiet, thoughtful teenager. She was the peacemaker, always smoothing over arguments, always helping me in the kitchen, always listening when I needed to talk. She dreamed of becoming a teacher, and I prayed that she would. By then, I had stopped dreaming for myself. My dreams were tied to theirs. The recession of 2008 hit us like a storm. People stopped fixing their cars unless it was absolutely necessary. The garage, already fragile, nearly collapsed. Some nights we didn't know if the lights would stay on. Friends lost homes, marriages broke, people moved away. I held on tighter than ever, tied to my family, tied to faith, tied to the belief that if we just kept going, tomorrow might be kinder. Through all of it, I learned the art of endurance. You wake up, you make coffee, you face the bills, you keep the children fed, you keep your husband from falling apart, and you tell yourself that it will all matter one day. And in some ways, it did. Emily graduated. Michael eventually took over much of the garage work. Sarah got into college, and I stayed the glue, the quiet force in the background, holding together the pieces no one else noticed were slipping. When the new decade began, I was in my 40s. My body ached more than before, but I didn't have time to think about it. Life had become a constant balancing act, keeping the house running, keeping the garage alive, and helping my children chase their own futures. Emily graduated from nursing school in 2010. The day she walked across that stage in her white uniform, I cried until my face was red. I remembered the little girl who once begged me for a flute she couldn't have, now standing tall, a nurse ready to save lives. She got her first job in a hospital in Cleveland, and for the first time, I felt like maybe the sacrifices had meant something. Michael stayed closer to us. He never finished school, but he became the heart of the garage. Customers trusted him, not just because he was good with cars, but because he had his father's way of talking straightforward, honest, no nonsense, but he carried anger inside him, the kind that comes from growing up in struggle. He worked long hours, rarely smiled, and sometimes drank too much. I worried about him, but he never let me close enough to see the full depth of his battles. Sarah went off to college in 2012. She was always the gentle one, the dreamer, but also the one who wanted to fix the world. She studied education, determined to teach children who, like her younger self, needed someone to believe in them. Once he left, the house grew quieter, emptier. I found myself wandering from room to room, touching the furniture as if it could fill the silence my children left behind. David's health never fully recovered after his accident. His leg worked, but his back grew worse with age. Some mornings he could hardly get out of bed. I became nurse and wife, caretaker and partner. He hated needing me, but I reminded him every day that he had carried us for years, and now it was my turn. We grew softer with each other in those years. The fights faded, replaced by quiet understanding, the kind of bond forged only in shared hardship. Then came 2015, and with it the darkest chapter of my life. Michael was killed in a car accident on the highway. I can still hear the phone ringing. That night, still remember the police officer's voice, calm and practiced, as he told me my son was gone. I dropped to the floor, the world spinning, the air gone from my lungs. Nothing prepares a mother for burying her child. Nothing. The days after were a blur of casseroles from neighbors, hugs from strangers, and paperwork that felt cruel in its demand for signatures, when all I wanted was my boy back. At the funeral, I held Emily and Sarah's hands, one on each side, and felt my family reduced, incomplete. David wept openly for the first time since I'd known him, his strong shoulders shaking under the weight of grief. The garage closed for months. I closed myself to shutting out the world. moving through days like a shadow, but life, stubborn as ever, demanded to be lived. Emily had a baby in 2016, a little girl she named Grace. Holding that child in my arms brought back something I thought I'd lost forever. Grace didn't erase the pain, but she reminded me that love still existed, that tomorrow still held promise. I became a grandmother, and with that came a new role, a new reason to keep going. Sarah finished her degree and began teaching at an elementary school. She called me every evening, telling me about her students, about the way they clung to her, about how she felt she was making a difference. I listened, proud, thankful, and sometimes jealous of the way her future stretched open before her, while mine seemed to be narrowing. By 2020, the world had changed. The pandemic swept through our town, closing businesses, filling hospitals, stealing lives. Emily worked on the front lines, wearing masks that left marks on her face, holding the hands of patients who couldn't see their families. I prayed for her every night, terrified that I would lose her the way I lost Michael. David's health worsened, his lungs weak, his body tired. He survived, but barely. The garage, already fragile, struggled again. We leaned on government aid, on church donations, on Sarah's steady paycheck. Somehow, we made it through. Now, as I sit here in my I look back on the life I have lived, the family I have held together. My body is tired, my hair gray, but my heart still beats with the strength of every battle fought. Primera Ave. Lost a child. I have nearly lost a husband. I have seen poverty, illness, and despair. But I have also seen my daughters rise, my granddaughter laugh. My family survive storms that should have broken us. People ask me sometimes how I did it, how I held everything together when the world seemed intent on tearing it apart. I tell them the truth. I didn't have it. When you are a mother, a wife, the keeper of a home, you don't quit. You cry in silence, you scream into pillows, you pray in the dark. But when the morning comes, you get up, you make coffee, you face the day, and you keep going. This is the story of my life. It is not glamorous, not extraordinary, not the kind of story people write books about, but it is real. It is filled with small victories, deep losses, endless bills, and fleeting joys. It is the story of an ordinary American woman who carried her family on her back, who loved them fiercely, who broke and healed and broke again, and who is still standing. If there is a lesson here, it is this: life will never be easy. It will take more than it gives, but if you hold on, if you cling to love, to family, to faith in something greater, you can endure. You can build a life out of broken pieces. And sometimes, when you least expect it, those broken pieces shine brighter than anything whole ever could.